Lesson 4. Assessing the market. Now you know the value of your product, but how are you going to turn that value to cash in the bank? This lesson is all about identifying a market, finding your first target customers, how much they're willing to pay, and how you can promote your product to them. The next question is, where is your customer? One of the core elements of marketing is the process of identifying where on the planet your customers are located and how to approach and persuade them to buy. Many people make the mistake of equating marketing with having press releases and advertisements, but marketing is actually much, much more than those activities. The promise. By the end of this lesson, you will understand how to identify your market and target those critical first customers for your offering. You will also learn how effective marketing will translate to direct the success of your product. The key to this lesson is to understand the specificities of each of these areas. One mistake that entrepreneurs commonly make when trying to identify their market is that they target a massive billion-dollar market and then declare that their offering will gain a gigantic percentage of that market. You, on the other hand, will use your market research to pinpoint exactly who your market is, how large it is, how much your product will be, and what promotional strategy they would be most receptive to. There is no skimming corners here. It will take a lot of work, but don't worry, we're here to guide you. Why now? A product is useless without diligent market research. You might as well stand on the side of the highway with a sign asking for donations. It would make you more money and waste less time. If you don't know who your customer is and where they're located, then you will need to rely on luck, and investors do not invest in luck-driven businesses. If you don't have a clear understanding of your ideal target market, then you'll struggle to find someone who cares about your product. Never be a solution looking for someone who cares. Build a solution knowing who will care. There are several marketing tools to consider when identifying your market and market segment. Tool number 1, Beachhead Market. The term beachhead strategy originated in battle, where when you invade enemy territory, you need to focus your strength and concentrate on winning a small border area, the beachhead, that becomes the stronghold from which you'll advance into the rest of the territory. Often in business, particularly startups, this is a good strategy because resources are limited, and the beachhead strategy is about focusing resources on one key area, usually a smaller market segment or product category, where the idea is to penetrate, ideally dominate that initial market, before moving into other larger markets and pool of customers. One point to note is, location is key. The importance of choosing a suitable location for the first market that'll be a decent indicator for success in future locations cannot be emphasized enough. Your beachhead market will be made up of the very first customers you will target. There are 3 conditions that define a beachhead market. The average customer within the market buys similar products as those within the region. The average customer within the market has a similar sales cycle as those within the region and expect products to provide value in similar ways. Word-of-mouth communication exists between customers in the market. For example, they may belong to the same professional organizations or operate in the same region. In a nutshell, a beachhead market is likely to be a company's main entry point for its regional or global activities. An ideal beachhead market is usually a market segment with low economic and political barriers, and one that facilitates easy mitigation to targeted markets subsequently. Singapore is often considered an excellent beachhead market for businesses wanting to expand in Southeast Asia and even Australia. Tool number 2. Total Addressable and Serviceable Markets, TASM. The total market, TM, is typically expressed as a large circle that represents an entire market. It then typically has a medium-sized circle called the Total Addressable Market, TAM, which represents the people whom you can address, meaning you can put a message in front of the individuals which will take an action to buy. You know their email address and phone number, you know what magazines they read, what billboards they drive past, what airlines they fly. Remember that this also includes your beachhead market. Next, you would have a smaller circle called the Total Addressable Serviceable Market, TASM, represents how many people you can serve at once. Here's an example that's based on a real case. Imagine that you invented a patented skin protection cream with nanoparticles that would synthesize under certain environmental conditions and release protective chemicals over a period of time. A potential total market might be the sunscreen market, as opposed to a medical market which is highly regulated. Obviously, by now you should realize that this market is too big. The total addressable market that you could consider would be athletes, but you would be better positioned to service a segment of that. So, The total addressable serviceable market could be extreme athletes who love triathlons. After you established yourself as a market leader in this segment, it would be much easier to scale into other markets. Think of it as a buffet. All the food you see is the total market. The amount of food you put on your plate is the addressable market, and the amount of food you can actually fit in your stomach is the serviceable market. We all know our eyes are bigger than our stomachs, so don't be deceived and get ahead of yourself. First-time entrepreneurs often put an unreasonably high number to represent their total addressable serviceable market. 1% of a total market can still end up being a large amount of customers. Keep in mind that very few businesses dominate any market the way that companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon dominate. Therefore, it's important to understand that you can build a very profitable business with a small market share. Show potential investors and other stakeholders that you can be successful with little, and then if you achieve a lot, even better. Tool number 3, SWOT. SWOT is an acronym that stands for Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats. If you draw a square and then a cross inside the square, you would have 4 boxes. Each box would be an S or W or O or T. Divide each box into 2 and label the outermost half outside and the innermost half inside. Then, make an honest list under each heading for both outside and inside the company that you're building. For example, there will always be threats outside the company, such as better funded competition, but the threats inside the company pose bigger risks to the company, such as a disruptive co-founder or investor. This exercise sounds easy, but most people overstate their strengths, rarely understand their weaknesses, are too optimistic about their opportunities, and then downplay any threats when approaching their total addressable serviceable markets. Be honest. This is your business, not your Tinder profile. The value of this exercise is realized when you think of each quadrant as something to move and promote. Keep in mind to always leverage your strengths, convert weakness into opportunities, neutralize a threat to a simple weakness, and then turn that weakness a strength. Opportunities are typically what you plan to do about strengths, weaknesses, and threats. The more weaknesses and threats, the more opportunities to craft a laser-focused value proposition and a sharper pitch to your investors and stakeholders. This in turn aids you in communicating the overall bigger picture better. Isn't that exciting? Answer any objections. People often say that this work is too hard and I will never be able to discover my market segments. It is hard. That's why many people give up and don't succeed. But you never know until you try. Without the work, you also would not find out many of the surprises sure to come. We had an alumni team that developed a treatment for treating prostate cancer. After going through this lesson, the team realized that treating macular degeneration was a better addressable market and more specifically on the human eye as a serviceable market than prostate cancer. Explain consequences of inaction. Not knowing who your customer is and where they're located will lead to a great deal of frustration and potential failure of your company. You may fail not because the offering is wrong, but because you invested too heavily in marketing to the wrong potential customer. A study done by Harvard Business claimed that in the U.S., 85% of 30,000 new product launches failed because of poor market segmentation. Do not let it happen to you. The good news is that most reasons for failure are well known and can be avoided with prior planning. There are many ways to segment the market. Demographic, behavioral, and attitudinal are examples of 3 large segments. Demographic is based on age, gender, income bracket, education, etc., while behavior variable is depending on behaviors. For instance, fast food consumers or people who exercise. Attitudinal is more complex as it's based on mindset. 2 people may have similar demographic status and behavior, but may hold completely opposing views on something which directly determine their purchasing patterns. There are trade-offs across all 3 segments, and a lot of time, cost, and research goes into narrowing in onto a particular segment, which is why this step is so crucial. In 1989, Pepsi launched Pepsi AM, a new version of the drink supposedly targeting those who consume soft drinks at breakfast. It reportedly had 28% more caffeine. Needless to say, it's one of Pepsi's biggest epic failures. The segmentation and assumption of there being a market for consumers who want cola for breakfast was a classic case of Pepsi not understanding its customer. Luckily, a giant like Pepsi had the bandwidth to get out of that product failure. Most startups wouldn't. If you do not understand your market, specifically your TASM, you won't even know how much money to raise or how much product to produce. Too much money sounds like a good problem to have, but it might mean you sold too much of your startup to investors. Having too little money is never good and means that you will need to scramble to raise more money if you can, or to dramatically adjust your planning in order to survive, and possibly still enter the market even undercapitalized. To recap, find your beachhead market, perform a TASM to identify your addressable and serviceable markets. Then SWOT inside and outside the company.